The crack of a whip tore through the dusty afternoon air of Copper Springs, Arizona Territory, 1878. Lila Hayes stumbled forward, her tattered dress clinging to her bleeding back as the crowd gathered in the town square fell silent. Another lash came down, and she bit her lip until it bled, determined not to give her tormentors the satisfaction of hearing her scream. "That'll teach you to steal from decent folk," shouted Sheriff Miller, a man whose badge had long ago become a license for cruelty rather than justice. Lila hadn't stolen anything. She had simply refused the advances of the sheriff's brother, a man with wandering hands and a sense of entitlement that matched the width of his family's cattle ranch. But in Copper Springs, refusing a Miller was as good as signing your own arrest warrant. Tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face as the third lash struck. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed into the dust, her golden hair falling around her face like a curtain. The crowd murmured, some with pity, others with the sick excitement that comes from watching another's suffering. "Give her another," called out Gerald Miller from the edge of the crowd. "My pocket watch is still missing." Sheriff Miller raised his arm again, the leather whip dangling like a venomous snake ready to strike. But before he could bring it down, a tall figure pushed through the crowd. "That's enough." The voice cut through the tension like a knife. Tristan Nash stood between Lila and the sheriff, his broad shoulders squared and his hand hovering near the Colt revolver on his hip. The afternoon sun glinted off his badge, not the local sheriff's star, but the silver emblem of a U.S. Marshal. "Move aside, Nash," Sheriff Miller spat. "This ain't your jurisdiction." Tristan didn't budge. Instead, he crouched down and shielded Lila's trembling body with his own. "No one touches her again," he said, his voice low but carrying across the now silent square. "Not while I'm breathing." The crowd held its collective breath as the two lawmen stared each other down. Miller was feared in these parts, but everyone knew that a U.S. Marshal carried federal authority. And Tristan Nash wasn't just any marshal, he had a reputation for being as fair as he was deadly with that revolver. "She's a thief," Miller insisted, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Then she deserves a trial," Tristan replied evenly. "Not a public flogging. Those went out with the Dark Ages, Miller." Lila looked up at her defender, her vision blurry with tears and pain. She had seen him around town for the past week, watching, observing. She had heard whispers about why a U.S. Marshal might be interested in their small town, but she had been too busy surviving to pay much attention. "I didn't steal anything," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Tristan glanced down at her, his blue eyes meeting her green ones for just a moment. "I believe you," he said quietly, before turning back to face Miller. The sheriff's hand tightened on his whip, his knuckles white with tension. But after a long moment he took a step back. "Fine, take the girl. But if that watch turns up in her possession, Marshal or not, you'll answer to me." Tristan didn't waste time arguing. He carefully helped Lila to her feet, mindful of her injuries. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her back. Her dress was torn open, exposing the raw, bleeding welts beneath, and she clutched the fabric to her chest to maintain what little dignity she had left. Tristan removed his long duster and draped it gently around her shoulders. The crowd parted as he guided her away from the square, toward the small hotel at the end of the main street where he had been staying. "Why did you help me?" Lila asked once they were out of earshot of the crowd. Tristan's expression remained stoic, but there was a softness in his eyes that belied his hard exterior. Because what was happening wasn't justice. It was cruelty. They reached the hotel, and Tristan nodded to the proprietor, Mrs. Jameson, a stern widow who ran the only respectable establishment in town. "I need hot water, clean bandages, and some of that healing salve you mentioned having," he said quietly. Mrs. Jameson took one look at Lila's condition and hurried off without a word. Tristan led Lila up the narrow staircase to his room, his hands steady beneath her elbow when she swayed from pain and exhaustion. The room was sparse but clean: a bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window. Papers and maps were spread across a small table, but Tristan quickly gathered them up and set them aside. "Sit," he said, pulling the chair out for her. "Mrs. Jameson will be up shortly." Lila sank gratefully onto the chair, sitting sideways to keep her wounded back from touching the wood. "They'll come after you for this," she said. "The Millers own this town." Tristan's mouth set in a grim line. "I suspected as much. That's why I'm here." Before Lila could ask what he meant, Mrs. Jameson entered with a basin of steaming water, clean cloths, and a jar of pungent-smelling salve. She set everything on the washstand and gave Tristan a knowing look. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything else," she said. And then, to Lila's surprise, the older woman squeezed her hand. "You're not alone anymore, child." After Mrs. Jameson left, an awkward silence fell over the room. Lila clutched Tristan's duster tighter around her shoulders. "I can't tend to your back myself," Tristan said finally. "Would you prefer I fetch the doctor or perhaps Mrs. Jameson to help?" Lila shook her head. "The doctor is Gerald Miller's drinking companion, and Mrs. Jameson is kind, but her hands shake with palsy." She took a deep breath. "I trust you." Tristan nodded, his expression grave as he understood the weight of her trust. "I'll be as careful as I can." With trembling fingers, Lila turned in the chair and lowered the duster and her torn dress just enough to expose her injured back while maintaining her modesty. She heard Tristan's sharp intake of breath at the sight of the damage. "Miller will pay for this," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He worked in silence, cleaning each wound with gentle, methodical care. The water in the basin turned pink with her blood, and despite his best efforts, Lila couldn't hold back small gasps of pain as he tended to the deeper lacerations. "Almost done," he said softly as he applied the salve. It stung at first, then spread a blessed coolness across her burning skin. "How did you come to be accused of stealing from the Millers?" Lila's hands clenched in her lap. "Gerald Miller offered to hire me as his housekeeper last week. When I realized what kind of services he actually wanted, I refused. The next day, he claimed his gold pocket watch was missing, and I was the only one who had been in his house. But you didn't take it." "Of course not. I may be poor, Marshal Nash, but I'm not a thief." Tristan finished bandaging her back and moved to face her, crouching down to her eye level. "Call me Tristan, and I believe you, Miss Hayes." "Lila," she corrected. "Just Lila." He nodded, his blue eyes studying her face. "Lila, then. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" She laughed bitterly. "I had a room at the boarding house, but after this, Mrs. Peterson will have my things on the street by now. She doesn't like trouble." "Then you'll stay here," Tristan said decisively. "I'll take a room down the hall." Lila's eyes widened. "I can't let you do that. Your reputation is not my concern right now," he cut in. "Your safety is. The Millers won't let this go, and until I can sort this mess out, you're under my protection." Something in the way he said it, firm, certain, brooking no argument, made Lila's heart flutter despite her pain. No one had protected her before. Not since her father died in the silver mines when she was 16, leaving her alone in a town that saw a young, pretty, unattached woman as fair game. "Thank you," she whispered. Tristan stood and gathered his papers from the table. "Rest now. I'll have Mrs. Jameson bring up some food later. Tomorrow we can talk about what happens next." After he left, Lila carefully moved to the bed, lying on her stomach to avoid pressure on her wounds. Despite the pain and the uncertainty of her situation, She felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of blue eyes that promised safety and hands that had touched her with such care. Tristan paced the small room Mrs. Jameson had given him down the hall. His mind was racing, partly with anger at what had been done to Lila, and partly with concern about how this complicated his mission in Copper Springs. He had been sent to investigate reports of corruption, missing tax revenues, homesteaders being driven off their land, and rumors of forced labor at the Miller mines. He'd spent a week gathering information, staying under the radar, and now he had put himself squarely in the Miller's sights by defending Lila publicly. But he couldn't regret it. The image of her falling to the ground, back bloodied and raw, had stirred something primal in him. In that moment, his mission had become secondary to protecting her. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Mrs. Jameson with a tray of food. "For the girl," she said, passing him the tray. "And a word of warning, Marshal. The Miller boys are downstairs, drinking and making threats. They're saying you're harboring a thief." Tristan's jaw tightened. "Miss Hayes is innocent." Mrs. Jameson's eyes were shrewd. "I don't doubt it. That Gerald Miller has been chasing after her for months. But be careful, Marshal. Those boys have killed for less than wounded pride." After Mrs. Jameson left, Tristan carried the tray to Lila's room. He knocked softly and waited until he heard her invite him in before entering. She was sitting up in bed, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, Tristan's duster still wrapped around her for modesty. The sight of her vulnerable yet resilient made something tighten in his chest. "I brought food," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. Lila smiled gratefully. "I'm starving. I haven't eaten since yesterday." As she ate, Tristan sat in the chair by the window, watching the street below where lanterns were being lit as dusk fell. "The Millers are downstairs," he said finally, "making threats." Lila paused mid-bite. "I told you they'd come after you. Let them try." His hand went to his revolver instinctively. Lila set down her fork. "Why are you really here in Copper Springs, Tristan? It can't be just to rescue women from public floggings." He studied her for a moment, weighing how much to tell her. She had already suffered at the Millers' hands. She deserved to know the truth. "I'm investigating the Millers," he said. "There have been reports of corruption, land grabs, and worse. The federal government is concerned about the territory's stability, with statehood being considered." Lila's green eyes widened. "Then I might be able to help you. I've worked all over this town washing clothes, serving at the saloon, cleaning houses. People talk in front of me like I'm not there." Tristan leaned forward, interest piqued. "What do you know?" "I know that 3 homesteaders who refused to sell to the Millers ended up dead in accidents last year. I know that Sheriff Miller collects double the tax he reports to the territory. And I know that there are men working in the Miller mines who didn't choose to be their drifters, who were arrested on false charges and sentenced to labor." Tristan's expression darkened with each revelation. "This is worse than we thought." "There's more," Lila continued, her voice dropping to a whisper despite the privacy of the room. "Gerald Miller keeps a ledger. I saw it once when I was cleaning his study. It had names, dates, amounts of money. Some entries were marked with a red X. Those who opposed them, Tristan guessed. Lila nodded. The last name with an X was Thomas Jenkins. He drowned in the creek the next day. Everyone knew he was an excellent swimmer. Tristan stood and began to pace, his mind working quickly. "If we could get that ledger, it would be enough to bring federal charges." "You're talking about breaking into the Miller ranch," Lila said, alarm evident in her voice. "That's suicide. They have armed guards, dogs." "I wasn't suggesting we do it tonight," Tristan said with a small smile. "First, you need to heal, and I need to gather more information, build a stronger case." Lila's shoulders relaxed slightly. Good. Because I'm not particularly mobile at the moment. She gestured to her bandaged back. Tristan's expression softened. How is the pain? Bearable, she said, though the tightness around her eyes suggested otherwise. The salve helped. Tristan reached for the jar on the washstand. Let me apply more before you sleep. The moment was intimate. Lila sitting with her back exposed once more. Tristan's fingers gentle as they spread the healing balm over her wounds. Neither spoke, but something shifted between them in that quiet room. A connection forming that went beyond rescuer and rescued. When he finished, Tristan cleared his throat. I'll let you rest now. Lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone but me or Mrs. Jameson. Lila caught his hand before he could turn away. Thank you, Tristan. Not just for this, she gestured to her bandaged back, but for believing me when no one else would. He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. Get some sleep, Lila. Tomorrow will be a new day. As he closed the door behind him, Tristan knew that protecting Lila had become more than just part of his job. It had become personal. And that was dangerous territory for a man in his position. The next few days fell into a cautious routine. Lila remained in Tristan's room, her back slowly healing under his careful attention. He would leave during the day to continue his investigation, returning with food and news. Mrs. Jameson brought clean clothes for Lila, simple dresses that had belonged to her daughter who had moved east to Philadelphia years ago. Tristan learned more about Lila during those quiet evenings. She was 22, orphaned at 16, educated by her schoolteacher mother before her death from influenza years earlier. She was intelligent and observant, with a quiet strength that impressed him more each day. Lila, in turn, discovered that beneath Tristan's stern exterior was a thoughtful man of 30 who had joined the Marshals after the war, driven by a deep sense of justice. He spoke little of his past, but she gathered he had lost family too, perhaps to the same conflict that had left a thin scar along his left temple and occasionally haunted his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. On the fourth day, when Tristan returned to the hotel, his expression was grimmer than usual. What's happened? Lila asked, setting aside the book Mrs. Jameson had lent her. The Millers are getting bolder, Tristan said, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. They've arrested 2 men who spoke in your defense at the square. Trumped up charges of disturbing the peace. Lila's hand flew to her mouth. Oh no. Who? The blacksmith, Anderson, and old Mr. Tanner from the general store. They have families, Lila said, distress evident in her voice. This is my fault. Tristan crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. No, this is the Millers' doing, not yours. They're trying to reassert control, show the town what happens to those who challenge them. We have to do something, Lila insisted. My back is much better. I can move without pain now. Tristan studied her face, noting the determined set of her jaw. I've been thinking about that ledger you mentioned. If Gerald Miller is as meticulous as you say, it could contain evidence of all their crimes. You want to try to get it, Lila guessed. I do, but not alone. He squeezed her hands. I need your help, Lila. You know the layout of the Miller Ranch, and you know where Gerald keeps the ledger. Lila took a deep breath. I do want to help, but I'm scared, Tristan. Not just for myself, but for you. If they catch you, they won't, he said with confidence. I've been planning this carefully. Gerald Miller hosts a poker game every Friday night. The ranch will be busy, attention focused on the main house. We can slip into his office and be gone before anyone notices. We, Lila repeated. You're not suggesting I come with you? It would be safer for you here, Tristan admitted. But I don't know the ranch and time will be limited. With your knowledge, we can be in and out quickly. Lila was quiet for a long moment, weighing fear against necessity. Finally, she nodded. Tomorrow is Friday. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. They spent the evening mapping out the Miller Ranch based on Lila's recollections. She sketched the layout of the main house, marking Gerald's office, the usual positions of guards, and the best approach from the western pasture where the shadows would provide cover. As night fell, they sat side by side at the small table, their shoulders touching as they finalized their strategy. The closeness of the past days had bred a familiarity between them that neither acknowledged directly but both felt keenly. What happens after? Lila asked suddenly. If we get the ledger and you have your evidence against the Millers, what then? Tristan's eyes met hers. I take the evidence to the territorial governor. Federal charges will be filed. The Millers will face justice. And you? Will you stay in Copper Springs? He hesitated, understanding the real question beneath her words. My job is to enforce the law wherever I'm needed, Lila. I go where I'm sent. Something flickered in her eyes' disappointment, perhaps before she looked away. Of course, I understand. Tristan wanted to say more, to tell her that meeting her had changed something in him, made him question the solitary path he had chosen. But the words stuck in his throat. Until the Millers were dealt with, until she was truly safe, he couldn't make promises he might not be able to keep. Instead, he reached out and tucked a strand of golden hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. One step at a time, he said softly. First we get the ledger. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Lila leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, the vulnerability there made his heart ache. One step at a time, she agreed. Friday evening arrived with a nervous energy that had both Tristan and Lila on edge. They dressed in dark clothing, and Tristan checked his revolver twice before tucking it into its holster. Mrs. Jameson had provided them with a small lantern that could be shuttered to hide its light, and Lila carried a cloth sack for the ledger. Remember, Tristan said as they prepared to leave through the back of the hotel. If anything goes wrong, we separate and meet back here. Your safety comes first. Lila nodded, though they both knew she was unlikely to leave him behind if trouble arose. They slipped out of town as dusk fell, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. The Miller Ranch lay 2 miles outside of Copper Springs, a sprawling property that encompassed the best grazing land and water access in the county. As they approached from the west, lights were already visible in the main house, and several horses were tied up outside, indicating the poker game was underway. Tristan and Lila crouched in the shadows of a large oak tree, observing the movements around the property. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, but their pattern was predictable, a circuit that took approximately 15 minutes to complete. There, Lila whispered, pointing to a side entrance. That door leads to the kitchen. The cook usually leaves it unlocked during big gatherings, so she can step out for air when the kitchen gets too hot. They waited until the guards had passed, then moved quickly across the open ground to the kitchen door. As Lila had predicted, it was unlocked. They slipped inside, finding the kitchen empty but full of the aromas of a large meal recently prepared. This way, Lila murmured, leading Tristan through the kitchen and down a narrow hallway. They could hear laughter and the clink of glasses from the direction of the main parlor where the poker game was being held. Gerald Miller's office was at the back of the house, a room Lila had cleaned many times during her brief employment there. The door was locked, but Tristan made quick work of it with the small set of tools he carried. Once inside, Lila shuttered the lantern to allow just enough light to see by without being visible from outside. The office was opulent heavy oak furniture, leather-bound books lining the walls, and a large desk dominating the center of the room. The ledger was kept in the bottom drawer, Lila whispered, moving toward the desk. It had a black leather cover with no markings. Tristan began searching the drawer she indicated while Lila kept watch at the door. The drawer was locked, but again Tristan's tools proved effective. Inside, among various papers and documents, was a black leather book exactly as Lila had described. "I've got it," he said, pulling it out and quickly flipping through the pages. His expression hardened as he scanned the entries. "This is it. Names, dates, transactions. Evidence of bribes, extortion, even payments to witnesses to change their testimony." Lila moved to his side, looking over his shoulder. "There," she pointed to an entry from 2 months prior. Thomas Jenkins, the X beside his name, and the date just 1 day before he drowned. Tristan carefully placed the ledger in the sack Lila had brought. "This is enough to put the Millers away for years. Let's go." They had just reached the door when voices in the hallway froze them in place. Gerald Miller and another man were approaching, their conversation growing louder with each step. "In my office," Gerald was saying, "I want to show you those new survey maps. The silver vein runs right through the Carson property." Tristan grabbed Lila's hand and pulled her behind a heavy curtain that covered one wall of the office. They pressed themselves flat against the window, hardly daring to breathe as the door opened and Gerald Miller entered with his companion. "I've had my eye on that land for years," Gerald continued, moving to his desk. "Old Carson refuses to sell, but his son might be more amenable after what happened to the Hayes girl." Lila tensed beside Tristan at the mention of her name. He squeezed her hand in warning to remain silent. "That was quite a spectacle," the other man commented. "Public whipping. Didn't think your brother still did those." Gerald laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "James likes to remind people who's in charge. Besides, the girl needed to be taught a lesson. No one refuses a Miller." Tristan felt Lila trembling with anger and tightened his grip on her hand. "Speaking of which," Gerald continued, "I need to check something." He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, and silence fell over the room. "What the devil? Where is it? What's missing?" his companion asked. "My ledger. It was right here." Gerald slammed the drawer shut. "Someone's been in here." The men moved toward the center of the room, and Tristan tensed, ready to draw his weapon if they approached the curtain. But at that moment, a commotion erupted from the direction of the parlor. Raised voices, the sound of furniture being overturned. "What now?" Gerald growled, and both men hurried from the office to investigate. "Now," Tristan whispered, pulling Lila from their hiding place. "We need to move fast." They abandoned their plan to leave through the kitchen, knowing it would likely be filled with people responding to the disturbance. Instead, Tristan opened the window behind the curtain, and they climbed out into the darkness. The alarm had been raised. Lanterns were being lit around the property, and men were shouting orders. Tristan and Lila kept to the shadows, moving away from the house toward the cover of trees that lined the property. They had almost reached the tree-line when a voice called out, "There! By the old oak!" A gunshot cracked through the night air, the bullet splintering bark inches from Lila's head. Tristan pulled her down and behind him, drawing his revolver. "Run for the trees," he ordered. "I'll cover you." "Not without you," Lila insisted. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Tristan returned fire, aiming at the lanterns rather than the men holding them. 2 lights went out, plunging part of the yard into darkness. Using the confusion to their advantage, they made a break for the trees, Tristan keeping himself between Lila and the pursuers. They reached the cover of the woods just as more shots were fired, bullets thudding into tree trunks around them. They ran, deeper into the forest, away from the lights and shouts of the Miller ranch. Tristan kept a firm grip on Lila's hand, guiding her through the darkness. The the sack with the ledger clutched tightly in his other hand. Only when they were certain they had lost their pursuers did they stop to catch their breath. Hidden in a small ravine that offered protection from both sight and sound. "Are you hurt?" Tristan asked, his hands searching Lila's arms and shoulders for injuries. "No," she gasped, still breathing hard from their flight. I'm fine." He checked the sack, ensuring the ledger was still safely tucked inside. "We need to keep moving. It's not safe to return to Copper Springs tonight. The Millers will have men searching everywhere." "Where will we go?" Tristan thought for a moment. "There's an abandoned line shack about 3 miles east of here. It's basic, but it will provide shelter for the night. Tomorrow we can make our way to Silver City. I have contacts there who can help us get the ledger to the territorial governor." Lila nodded, trusting his judgment. They set off again, moving more slowly now but still cautious, alert to any sounds of pursuit. The line shack was as Tristan had described, a simple one-room structure with a dirt floor and a small fireplace. It had been used by cowboys during roundups in the past but appeared to have been abandoned for some time. Tristan checked the perimeter before allowing Lila inside. The interior was dusty but intact, with a narrow cot against one wall and a rough wooden table and chair. "It's not the hotel," he said apologetically, "but it's secure for the night." Lila sank onto the cot, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "It's perfect. We're alive and we have the ledger. That's all that matters." Tristan built a small fire in the fireplace, careful to keep it low so the light wouldn't be visible from a distance. In its warm glow, he examined the ledger more thoroughly, his expression growing darker as he turned the pages. "This is worse than I imagined," he said finally. "The Millers have been terrorizing this county for years. Bribes to officials, payments to gunmen, records of accidents arranged for those who opposed them." Lila moved to sit beside him, looking at the damning evidence. "Will it be enough?" "More than enough," Tristan assured her. "With this, the territorial governor can bring federal charges. The Millers' reign is over." Lila leaned against him, relief and exhaustion making her light-headed. "I can hardly believe it. For so long, they've seemed untouchable." Tristan put his arm around her, drawing her closer. "No one is above the law, Lila, not even the Millers." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the small fireplace. The danger they had faced, the close proximity of the past days, and the uncertain future ahead all combined to create an intimacy between them that neither could deny any longer. "What will you do?" Tristan asked softly. "After this is over?" Lila considered the question. "I don't know. I have no family left. No real ties to Copper Springs other than familiarity. Perhaps it's time for a fresh start somewhere new." Tristan was quiet for a moment. "You could come to Santa Fe," he said finally. "That's where the territorial offices are. I'll be reporting there after this assignment is complete." Lila looked up at him, searching his face in the firelight. "Is that what you want? For me to come with you?" Tristan met her gaze, all his usual reserve falling away. "Yes," he said simply. "I want that very much." The honesty in his blue eyes made Lila's heart skip a beat. "Why?" "Because in just a few days you've become important to me, Lila. More important than I thought possible." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I admire your courage, your resilience, and I find myself thinking about a future that includes you." Lila covered his hand with her own. "I've been thinking the same thing. About you. About us. I know it's fast. Life can be short," Tristan interrupted, "especially out here. I've learned not to waste time when something matters." He paused, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "And you matter, Lila." The declaration hung between them, honest and unadorned. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Tristan lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Lila responded, raising her hands to his shoulders and pulling him closer, it deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Lila rested her forehead against his. "I'll come to Santa Fe," she whispered. Tristan smiled, the first full, unguarded smile she had seen from him. "Good," he said, pulling her back into his embrace. "Because I don't think I could leave you behind." They spent the night in the line shack, alternating watches despite Tristan's insistence that he could keep guard while Lila slept. Neither fully relaxed until dawn broke, painting the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold. With daylight, they set out for Silver City, avoiding main roads and keeping to less traveled paths. The journey was tense but uneventful, and by late afternoon, they reached the bustling mining town. Tristan led Lila to a small but respectable hotel where he was known to the proprietor. There, he sent telegrams to his superiors and arranged for armed guards to protect the ledger and themselves until federal agents could arrive. 3 days later, federal marshals and a representative from the territorial governor's office rode into Silver City. The evidence was examined, statements were taken from both Tristan and Lila, and warrants were issued for the arrests of Sheriff James Miller, his brother Gerald, and several of their associates. Tristan insisted on accompanying the federal marshals back to Copper Springs, but he was equally insistent that Lila remain safely in Silver City. "I can't risk you being anywhere near when they're arrested," he told her. "The Millers might have men we don't know about, loyalists who could try to silence you." Lila wanted to argue but knew he was right. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said instead. "I promise," he replied, sealing it with a kiss that left her in no doubt of his determination to return to her. The week that followed was the longest of Lila's life. News trickled in slowly. The Millers had been arrested, along with 12 of their associates. The sheriff's deputy had turned state's evidence. Gerald Miller's office had yielded even more incriminating documents. Finally, a telegram arrived from Tristan. "All secure. Coming for you. Wait for me." 2 days later, Tristan arrived in Silver City, tired but triumphant. The Millers were in federal custody, being transported to Santa Fe to stand trial. The territorial governor had appointed an interim sheriff for Copper Springs, and investigations were underway into all the crimes detailed in Gerald's ledger. "It's really over?" Lila asked as they sat together in the hotel dining room. "It's over," Tristan confirmed. "The Millers will spend the rest of their lives in prison. And those they've wronged will see justice done at last." Lila reached across the table to take his hand. "And us? What happens now?" Tristan turned her hand over and placed a small key in her palm. "This is for you. A house in Santa Fe. Nothing grand, but it's on a quiet street near the plaza. I bought it years ago, thinking someday I might settle down." Lila stared at the key, then at Tristan. "Are you asking me to live with you?" "I'm asking you to marry me," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it's soon. Too soon, perhaps. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Lila, I love you." Tears welled in Lila's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." 2 months later, they stood together in a small church in Santa Fe. Lila wore a simple white dress with lace at the collar and sleeves, designed to cover the scars on her back, scars that were fading but would never completely disappear. Tristan wore his best suit, his marshal's badge polished and pinned to his lapel. The ceremony was small, attended by a few of Tristan's colleagues and friends they had made since arriving in Santa Fe. Mrs. Jameson had made the journey from Copper Springs, along with Mr. Anderson the blacksmith and several others who had supported Lila during the Miller's trial. As they exchanged vows, Lila thought back to that terrible day in the town square, the pain, the humiliation, the moment when she had thought all was lost. And then Tristan had appeared, shielding her body with his own, uttering the words that had changed everything. No one touches her again. He had kept that promise. And now, as he slipped a gold band onto her finger, he was making a new one to love and protect her for all their days. Later, as they danced at their small reception, Tristan held her close, mindful as always of her healing back. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. Lila looked up at him, seeing in his face everything she had never dared to hope for: love, respect, partnership. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. As the sun set over Santa Fe, painting the adobe buildings in hues of gold and rose, Lila knew that the life stretching before them would not always be easy. Tristan's job as a marshal would bring dangers, and the memories of what they had endured in Copper Springs would never completely fade. But they had found in each other a strength and a love that transcended their individual scars. Together, they had faced down evil and emerged victorious. And together, they would build a future where justice and love prevailed. "No one touches her again," Tristan had promised that day in the dusty square. As he held her now, safe in the circle of his arms, Lila knew it was a promise he would keep for a lifetime.